My name is Robin Garcia, and I was 32 years old when I learned how quickly a life can end without a single argument, without raised voices, without tears. Just one careless laugh, spoken too loudly at the wrong moment. For 3 summers, the smell of charcoal and sizzling meat had meant comfort to me. It meant belonging. It meant Sunday afternoons spent in a backyard that wasn't mine, but had slowly begun to feel like it could be. This was Howard Vollmer's family's house, the wide deck with warped boards, the stubborn screen door that never closed properly, the sun-faded patio furniture that leaned slightly to the left. I knew it all by heart. I knew when his uncle would complain about the neighbor's lawn, how many minutes to listen before refilling his beer, and exactly which cutting board his aunt preferred when someone helped in the kitchen. That day, I was at the grill beside his uncle wearing a stained apron over my t-shirt, turning chicken breasts with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this many times before. Howard's uncle was explaining indirect heat like it was ancient wisdom, and I nodded along, smiling, shifting the meat just enough to make him feel helpful. I had brought my own potato salad, the one my mother taught me to make heavy on dill and vinegar. His aunt had hugged me when I arrived, whispering, "A woman who cooks like this is dangerous in the best way." I believed her. From the patio, laughter drifted over. Howard was holding court with his cousins, animated and charming, telling some story from work. He caught my eye briefly and smiled, quick, distracted, polite. I felt that familiar warmth settle in my chest. This was my life, or so I thought. Later, when plates were full and conversations softened into that lazy hum that only comes after shared food, I began gathering empty dishes near the kitchen door. That was when his uncle slung an arm around my shoulder and pulled me back toward the group where Howard sat relaxed, confident, entirely at ease. So his uncle boomed loud enough for everyone to hear, wagging a finger between the two of us. "When is our Howard finally going to settle down and make an honest woman out of you, Robin? We're not getting any younger." It was a familiar joke, one Howard usually deflected with a grin, one I had learned to smile through. But this time Howard didn't smile. He laughed. Not warmly, not kindly. It was a sharp, dismissive sound that sliced straight through the patio chatter. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone's drink hovered halfway to their mouth. With her, Howard said loud, clear, unapologetic, "Please." The world didn't blur, it sharpened. I noticed everything, the freckles on his aunt's stunned face, the way his cousin looked down at her lap, the bottle frozen in his uncle's hand. Howard leaned forward in his chair like he was sharing a joke everyone was meant to enjoy. "Settle is the right word," he continued, gesturing lazily at the grill, the deck, the quiet suburb beyond the fence. "I'm not signing up for this." My heart didn't race, it stopped. "Robin's great," he added, tone softening into something patronizing. "She's sweet, really sweet. But come on." He looked at his cousins, searching for agreement. "She's my for now. Everyone knows that, right?" No one laughed. The silence was absolute. I searched his face for regret, for panic, for some sign that he had gone too far. There was none. Only mild irritation, as if I were the one ruining the moment by not playing along. A calm settled over me, unnatural and complete. I walked to his aunt and placed my half-eaten plate gently into her hands. "Thank you for lunch," I said evenly. "It was wonderful." Then I turned to Howard. "You're right," I said, my voice steady, clear enough for everyone to hear. "You're absolutely right." I didn't wait. I didn't explain. I walked off the deck across the lawn and toward my car. Behind me, someone called my name. Howard muttered something sharp and annoyed. I closed the gate softly behind me. The sound felt final. The drive home felt unreal, like my body had taken over, while my mind stayed behind on that sunlit deck, frozen in a moment I refused to replay. There was no dramatic soundtrack in my head, no cinematic flood of tears blurring the road, just the steady hum of the engine, the traffic lights changing on cue, my hands gripping the wheel with calm precision. I noticed everything in a strangely detached way. The crack in the asphalt near the corner bakery, the way the evening light softened the storefronts, the faint vibration of my phone in the cup holder that I ignored without hesitation. Howard called, once, then again. I didn't answer. I didn't feel the need to. Whatever explanation he was preparing had already arrived too late. The version of me who might have rushed to soothe the awkwardness, who might have laughed it off for the sake of harmony, was still sitting on that patio, politely holding a paper plate. The woman driving the car was someone else, someone empty enough to finally see clearly. When I reached my apartment, the quiet inside felt different. Not lonely, exposed, like a stage after the actors have left and the lights haven't quite gone out yet. I stood in the entryway for a moment, keys still in my hand, and looked around. The framed photo from his sister's wedding on the bookshelf. Howard's jacket slung over the back of the chair. The candle he loved, the expensive one that smelled like rain and peonies half burned on the coffee table. Objects I had once associated with comfort now looked like props from a play I hadn't realized had already closed. I didn't sit down. I didn't collapse. I opened my laptop. The blank document stared back at me, waiting. I titled it simply Exit Strategy. The first step wasn't emotional. It was logistical. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how deep the fracture went. I started with the obvious things: his jacket, the spare charger he'd left by the couch, the coffee mug with the inside joke that suddenly felt stale and embarrassing. I folded his clothes carefully, not angrily, not with trembling hands, but with the detached focus of someone archiving a completed chapter. I wrapped the framed photo in tissue paper. I extinguished the candle and placed it unbroken into a box. I wasn't erasing him, I was containing him. My phone lit up again. Howard's name followed by message after message. What was that? You embarrassed me. My uncle feels terrible. You completely overreacted. It was a joke. I read them the way one might read a report about a stranger interested, but untouched. There was no apology in the words, only irritation. Annoyance that I hadn't played my part, that I'd stepped out of the script without permission. By the time the messages shifted into something resembling regret, it was already too late. I'm sorry you got your feelings hurt. You know I didn't mean it like that. Can we just talk? Sorry you got your feelings hurt. A masterpiece of deflection. An apology that placed the problem squarely inside me, neatly absolving him of responsibility. I set the phone face down and returned to packing. Later that night, when the apartment was quiet and the box was sealed and pushed into the back of the closet, I powered my phone off completely. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of space I hadn't realized I'd been missing. In that silence, memories began to surface, not the polished highlights, but the outtakes I'd edited out for years. Canceling plans because Howard needed help. Sitting through conversations where my work was treated like a quaint hobby. Being praised for being easy, low-maintenance understanding. Words I'd once taken as compliments now revealed themselves as expectations. I had been convenient, reliable, temporary. The next morning, Howard came to my door. I didn't open it. I heard his voice through the wood, impatient and familiar, calling my name like I'd misplaced something that belonged to him. I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, scrolling through the news with deliberate calm. This is ridiculous, he said. You're being dramatic. I took another sip of coffee. The lock held. The silence answered. When his footsteps finally retreated, something inside me settled. Not hardened, clarified. He hadn't come to apologize. He had come to regain control, to scold me back into position. The realization felt oddly freeing. That afternoon, I began the second phase. Passwords changed. Shared accounts untangled. The small savings fund I'd been contributing to withdrawn. Each task was mundane, administrative, almost boring. And yet with every completed step, I felt lighter. Howard noticed. Did you change the streaming password my mom asked about you? This isn't you, Robin. He was right. It wasn't. By evening, I had made one more call to an old friend I hadn't seen in years because Howard had once dismissed her as too much. She answered on the second ring, surprised, delighted, entirely uncomplicated. We laughed. We made plans. When I hung up, I realized something quietly monumental. The silence I'd chosen wasn't punishment. It wasn't strategy. It was the sound of a door closing on a version of myself that had been surviving on crumbs, mistaking them for meals. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet felt like it belonged to me. Weeks passed in a way that felt both fast and strangely distant, like watching time through glass. The silence I had chosen settled into a rhythm, not heavy, not dramatic, just present. My mornings filled with routines that belonged entirely to me. Long runs before work, quiet breakfasts, evenings that no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's schedule to align with mine. The absence of Howard didn't ache the way I'd been told it would. Instead, it clarified, like removing background noise you hadn't realized was exhausting you. I didn't check his social media. That choice wasn't discipline. It was disinterest. I had no appetite for watching a curated version of his life perform happiness on demand. But information has a way of finding you anyway, slipping through the cracks carried by people who don't realize they're delivering messages. It arrived one Tuesday evening in the form of a text from Megan Howard's cousin. The quiet one, the only person at the barbecue who hadn't forced a smile. Hey Robin, this is probably weird. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about what happened that day. You didn't deserve it. I hope you're okay. I stared at the message longer than necessary, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. It landed gently like an acknowledgement rather than a reopening. Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. I'm doing well, I replied. Her response came quickly, then stalled, then arrived in pieces like someone choosing their words with care. Things have been strange. Howard's seeing someone new, a woman named Vanessa. He met her really fast. Fast, of course he had. I didn't feel jealousy. I waited for it almost out of habit, but it never arrived. Instead, there was a cool, clinical sense of confirmation, a puzzle piece sliding neatly into place. A week after the barbecue, Megan continued. She's a creative director or something. Very intense. Very different. Different was the word Howard always used when he wanted to sound aspirational instead of dissatisfied. I pictured it without effort. Loud confidence. Sharp edges. The kind of person who mistook chaos for passion and volume for depth. I hope it works out for him, I typed, and meant exactly what the words implied, nothing more, nothing less. A few days later, the visual evidence surfaced without my consent. I was at dinner with my friend, laughing relaxed, when she hesitated, phone in hand. You don't have to see this, she said carefully, but I thought you should know in case someone else shows you. She turned the screen toward me. There they were, Howard and Vanessa on a rooftop bar. City lights behind them, her arm hooked possessively through his. She wore something sleek and dramatic. He looked louder, like a man performing a role he thought suited him better. The caption read, "When you stop settling for fine and finally choose fire." Fire. The word burned itself into the back of my mind, not painfully, but memorably. It was the kind of statement designed to wound to reach backward and reframe the past as something he had escaped rather than squandered. I felt nothing. Not hurt, not anger, just a detached curiosity, like observing a stranger make a very predictable mistake. He looks different, my friend said carefully. He does, I agreed. More himself, maybe, or more who he thinks he's supposed to be. The weeks that followed confirmed it. Megan's messages became less apologetic and more observational, like updates from a place I'd already left. Vanessa quit her job. They're talking about moving in together. There was a fight at a family dinner. The tone shifted gradually from excitement to defensiveness to unease. Howard's family, once so effortlessly united behind him, began to fracture under the strain. His mother developed convenient headaches whenever Vanessa was mentioned. His aunt refused to invite them both to gatherings. The loyalty that had once felt automatic was suddenly conditional. Meanwhile, my life expanded quietly. I accepted the promotion I'd been hesitant about before the one that required travel independence, and the kind of focus Howard had always called a distraction from real life. I signed up for a certification course I'd bookmarked a year ago, but never started because it felt selfish at the time. I reconnected with friends who didn't require me to be smaller, softer, easier. One evening, as I was leaving the office later than usual, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. I miss you. No name, no context, just the words. I deleted it without replying. The upgrade, I realized, wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't the rooftop bars, or the captions, or the performance of passion. The real upgrade was distance space that allowed patterns to reveal themselves without emotional distortion. Fire burns bright, but it also consumes. And from where I stood warm in my own quiet, I could already see the smoke forming on the horizon. By the time the cracks became visible, I had already stopped counting the weeks. Time no longer revolved around Howard's orbit, and that alone felt like a small, private victory. His life, however, had begun to broadcast its instability loudly, carried to me secondhand through people who didn't quite know why they felt compelled to update me, only that something about the situation felt wrong. Megan's messages changed tone first. They arrived less frequently, but when they did, they carried weight. Vanessa quit her job permanently. She wrote one evening. She says she's focusing on her personal brand now. Howard says it's temporary. Temporary. The word echoed faintly in my mind, stripped of its old sting now, just another data point. A few weeks later, another message followed. Howard asked his mom for money, just to help with rent. She said no. It was ugly. I didn't reply, not because I lacked empathy, but because curiosity had quietly exited my system. Their chaos no longer felt like a story I needed to finish reading. Then came the shift from inconvenience to concern. "Have you talked to Howard at all?" Megan asked late one night. "Vanessa showed up at his work today." There was a scene. People stared. It was uncomfortable. I set my phone down and stared out my window at the steady glow of the city. Somewhere a couple laughed on the sidewalk below. A bus hissed as it pulled away from the curb. Life moved forward, indifferent to anyone's personal implosions. Fire, I thought, always looks romantic until it starts to burn indiscriminately. The call that followed didn't come from Megan. It came from Howard's uncle. Seeing his name on my screen felt surreal, like a ghost reaching out from a former life. I answered calmly, already braced for whatever version of the truth he was about to offer. "Robin," he said, sounding older than I remembered, "I owe you an apology." He didn't rush it. He explained how what Howard had said at the barbecue had unsettled the family, how it hadn't sat right, how his wife had refused to host dinners anymore if Vanessa was invited, how Howard looked thinner, edgier, less certain. "I'm not calling to defend him," he added quickly. "I'm calling because I'm worried." I listened without interrupting, without softening. "She's intense," he continued. "Controls his phone, gets angry if he's late. They borrowed my pressure washer last month and returned it broken, then blamed me for it." A pause. "That's not the worst of it. I already knew what was coming." I could feel it settling into place like the last piece of a pattern. "She yells," he said quietly. "Not just raised voices. Screaming. And he covers for her. Makes excuses. I think he's scared." The irony was almost poetic. Howard, who had once called my stability boring, now drowning in the chaos he'd labeled passion. "I think his uncle said carefully that when this falls apart, and it will, he's going to reach out to you. You were always the steady one, the safe one." There it was, the unspoken expectation finally spoken aloud. "I wanted to warn you," he finished, "so you wouldn't be blindsided." I looked around my apartment, the clean surfaces, the calm order, the life I had built deliberately in the space Howard no longer occupied. "Thank you for telling me," I said evenly, "but I won't be a fallback plan. I'm not a safe landing after someone chooses to jump into fire." His sigh carried both regret and relief. "I figured you'd say that. I don't blame you." After we hung up, I sat for a long moment, not in satisfaction, not in vindication, but in quiet certainty. The situation was unraveling exactly as it always had to, not because I'd walked away, but because it had been unstable from the beginning. 2 days later, the message arrived, this time from Howard himself, bypassing the silence through a new number. "Robin, please, I need to talk. It's important." The tone was different now. No accusation, no irritation, just hollow. I deleted it. Another message followed, then a voicemail. I listened to it while chopping vegetables for dinner, my hands steady, my attention divided. "I keep thinking about you," his voice said, stripped of its former confidence, "about how easy things were, how safe. I think I made a mistake. I think I made a lot of them." He paused, breath shaky. "I don't have anyone else to talk to." That I realized was the truth he'd never meant to say out loud. I finished cooking. I ate. I washed the dishes. Then I blocked the number. Fire doesn't just burn what it touches. It tries to pull everything nearby into the flames. And I had already stepped far enough away to feel the cool air again. The silence that followed my decision to block Howard felt earned, like rest after a long climb. For a few days, nothing happened. No new messages, no unexpected calls. I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had finally understood what my absence meant. That walking away hadn't been a tactic or a phase, but a permanent recalibration. I should have known better. The escalation didn't come directly from him at first. It came through intermediaries delivered carefully, dressed up as concern rather than pressure. A mutual acquaintance asked if I'd heard from Howard lately. His cousin sent a tentative message that began with, "You don't owe him anything but," a sentence that always ends with an attempt to make you feel like you do. I ignored them all. Then, on a rainy Thursday evening, the universe decided subtlety was no longer necessary. I was leaving my gym downtown, hair, still damp, muscles pleasantly sore, when I saw him leaning against the brick wall beneath the awning. Howard looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, though he was thinner, but energetically, like someone who had misplaced his center of gravity and never quite recovered it. "Robin," he said, pushing off the wall with a nervous smile. "I figured you'd be here." I didn't stop walking. He fell into step beside me, his movements slightly rushed, mismatched with my pace. "You've been ignoring me," he said, as if stating an unfair inconvenience. I've been trying to talk to you. Yes, I replied calmly, adjusting the strap of my bag. I know. The simplicity of my answer threw him off. He blinked, scrambling to recalibrate. I said I was sorry, he continued, voice tightening. I admitted I made a mistake. What else do you want me to do? People passed us, glancing over, sensing tension without context. Howard hated public discomfort. I could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened. I stopped just inside the parking garage, fluorescent lights washing everything in harsh clarity. I turned to face him fully for the first time. I don't want anything, I said evenly. That's what you're not understanding. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. You don't just stop caring. I didn't stop caring, I corrected gently. I stopped participating. The words landed harder than I expected. His jaw tightened. You're acting like I destroyed everything. It was one comment. One comment I repeated, said publicly, casually, confidently, as if it had been rehearsed. His composure cracked. I was under pressure. My uncle put me on the spot. I had to say something. And what you chose to say, I replied, was the truth. That did it. His frustration spilled over into something raw and desperate. I didn't mean it like that, he said, voice rising. You know me. You know I care about you. You were my best friend. I took a small step back when he reached for my arm, avoiding the contact without drama. I wasn't your best friend, I said quietly. I was your placeholder. You said that yourself. I'm just respecting the role you assigned me. His eyes flashed hurt, then anger. So that's it. After everything, you're just done. You see me like this, and you feel nothing. I studied him carefully. The man who had once filled my days, now standing in front of me, unraveling, seeking comfort he had discarded. I feel clarity, I said honestly, and that's enough. He laughed bitterly. You always were like this. Calm, cold, safe, boring. The words came out sharp, rehearsed, familiar. I needed more, real passion. I nodded slowly. Then I hope you find it. His anger collapsed inward, transforming into something uglier, fear. Vanessa isn't who I thought she was, he admitted suddenly, voice dropping. She yells. She breaks things. She hasn't paid rent in months. I'm exhausted. I'm scared. There it was, the confession he hadn't planned to make. I need you, he said barely above a whisper, just to talk, just until things settle. I felt it then, not triumph, not satisfaction, but the final confirmation of everything I had already known. I was being asked to absorb the fallout of a decision I hadn't made. I can't be that for you, I said gently, and I won't. His face twisted, desperation giving way to resentment. So you're just going to let me drown? I met his gaze steadily. You're not drowning, Howard. You chose the water. I chose the shore. Silence stretched between us, heavy and irreversible. Go to hell, he muttered finally. I turned toward my car without another word. In the mirror, I saw him sink down onto a concrete barrier, head in his hands. It was the last image I would ever have of him, no longer powerful, no longer charming, just a man confronting the cost of his own certainty. As I drove away, I didn't feel relief. I felt finality. After that night in the parking garage, the noise finally died down, but not because the storm had passed. It was because it had moved somewhere I no longer lived. For a while, there was nothing. No calls from unknown numbers. No tentative messages from cousins. No updates filtered through well-meaning intermediaries. The silence this time wasn't chosen or cultivated. It was imposed by exhaustion, by the slow realization on Howard's side that there was no version of this story where I stepped back into the role he'd abandoned. When the updates resumed, they arrived differently, not as gossip, as concern. It started with Megan again, careful and apologetic, as if she were crossing a border she knew she had no right to cross. I know you asked not to be involved, she wrote, so you don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know. Things are bad. I read the message once, then again, feeling nothing spike in my chest. No dread, no pull, just information. Vanessa moved out. Megan continued, then moved back in, then out again. Howard's been sleeping on the couch at work some nights. He looks awful. He won't admit it, but I think he's unraveling. I set the phone down and went back to what I had been doing, reviewing notes for an upcoming meeting, the kind of meeting I'd once avoided because it made Howard feel outpaced. Now it was just another part of my day. A few days later, his mother reached out. Her message was polite, restrained, carefully neutral, the way people write when they're trying not to betray loyalty, but failing anyway. I hope you're well, she began. I know you don't owe us anything, but I thought you should know Howard's struggling. We're worried. I didn't reply. It wasn't cruelty, it was accuracy. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't reopen a door I had closed with intention. Sympathy in this context would be interpreted as permission. The final push came from someone unexpected, Howard's sister. She called. While I was at the grocery store, her name flashing across my screen like a test I hadn't studied for. I stepped aside into the quiet of the frozen food aisle and answered. Robin, she said, voice tight. I won't take much of your time. She didn't waste words. She told me about the shouting, about the broken phone, about the night Howard had shown up at her place shaking, asking to sleep on the couch because he didn't feel safe going home. He keeps saying he messed everything up, she said quietly, that he threw away the one person who actually loved him. I closed my eyes briefly, not in pain, but in acknowledgement of how predictable it all was. He needs help, she added, and he won't listen to anyone. Not us, not our parents, but he always listened to you. There it was, the final naked expectation. I'm sorry, I said gently, but I can't be his anchor anymore. There was a pause on the line, thick with disappointment and something close to understanding. I figured you'd say that, she replied. I just had to try. After the call ended, I stood there for a moment, surrounded by freezers humming softly, thinking about how often women are asked to absorb consequences they didn't create simply because they once provided comfort. Howard's collapse wasn't sudden. It was slow and undignified. He missed work, then lost it. He moved back in with his parents for a while, then left after another argument. Vanessa was gone for good this time, taking with her the last illusion that intensity could replace stability. And through it all, I remained absent. Not hidden, not afraid, just finished. My life continued to expand in quiet, unremarkable ways. I traveled for work. I filled my weekends with people who didn't require me to dim myself. I slept deeply. I laughed easily. Peace became normal instead of aspirational. Sometimes late at night, I wondered what it would feel like to check in, to ask how he was doing, to offer the kind of kindness that once came so naturally to me. And every time the answer was the same. That kindness had a cost I was no longer willing to pay. Howard didn't need me to save him. He needed to sit with the consequences of believing that safety was something you could discard and retrieve at will. And I needed to keep walking forward into a life that no longer asked me to shrink in order to be chosen. The invitation arrived almost a year to the day after the barbecue cream-colored cardstock with neat lettering and a handwritten note tucked inside. Julia Howard's older cousin had always been kind to me in a way that didn't feel performative. Her message was simple. No pressure at all, but I'd love for you to come. Truly. I didn't hesitate. Not because I needed closure. Not because I wanted to prove anything. I accepted because my life no longer revolved around avoiding places where Howard might exist. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't bracing. I was simply living. The wedding was held at a garden venue on the outskirts of the city, all soft lights and late summer air. I wore a navy dress that fit well and required no second guessing. I arrived calm, present, unarmed. I wasn't alone, but I wasn't accompanied in the way people would expect. Claire, a colleague from my new project team, came with me, married sharp and entirely uninterested in drama. She knew the story and had offered with a grin to be pleasant company and moral support if needed. The ceremony was lovely. Julia looked radiant. The vows were sincere, without being theatrical, grounded in a way that made me smile. I clapped. I laughed. I felt exactly what the moment required, nothing more, nothing less. Then I saw them. Howard's family stood together across the lawn, a constellation I no longer orbited. His mother noticed me first, her expression shifting into something warm and sad. She raised a hand in a small wave. I returned it politely. His uncle offered a solid nod of approval. Megan smiled openly. His sister looked away. Howard sat alone at a table near the edge of the reception, dressed well, but wearing the unmistakable posture of someone trying to take up less space than before. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. The chair beside him remained empty. I felt no rush, no tightening, just awareness. Claire and I mingled easily, laughing with friends of the bride, sharing cake-making plans for the next day's site visit. Normal conversation, normal joy, the kind that doesn't require an audience. I sensed him before I heard him, the familiar tension of someone approaching with something unresolved. Robin, I turned calmly. Howard stood there looking older, not in years, but in erosion. His confidence, once effortless, now seemed practiced and brittle. He searched my face for something recognition, nostalgia, leverage. You came, he said, stunned. Julia invited me, I replied evenly. I was happy to celebrate with her. You look good, he added, as if surprised by this outcome. Thank you. You look well. It was the kind of harmless lie we tell strangers empty of intent. A pause stretched between us, filled only by the band's soft music drifting across the lawn. Vanessa and I are done, he said finally. For good. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied. The words were automatic, stripped of meaning. He flinched, not at cruelty, but at indifference. I see you now, he said quietly. The woman you became. This confidence, this calm. I did this, didn't I? His voice lowered, urgent. What I said, it woke you up. It made you stronger. I set you free. There it was, the last story he needed to tell himself. I took a slow sip of sparkling water, buying myself a moment not to soften. No, I said gently. You have that backwards. He leaned in, hopeful. I didn't become this to prove anything to you. I became this because the woman who would have stood there and accepted what you said, who would have laughed it off, explained it away, waited for you to change, that woman couldn't stay. You didn't make me. You revealed what I needed to leave behind. His expression trembled. So you don't feel anything, he asked, voice barely steady. I feel happy for Julia, I said. I feel content with my work. I feel peace when I go home. And with you, I replied calmly, I feel nothing. The word landed hard. Not dramatic, not cruel, just final. Claire appeared beside me, as if on cue, placing a glass of water into my hand with an easy smile. Ready to head out soon, she asked. We have an early morning. Yes, I said, smiling back. Almost. She turned to Howard, warm and sincere. Lovely wedding, isn't it? He couldn't answer. I gave him one last polite nod. Take care of yourself. Then I turned away, slipping seamlessly back into a life that no longer required me to explain my absence. As Claire and I walked toward the exit under strands of twinkle lights, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Some stories end loudly, others close with quiet certainty. Mine had already moved on. The drive away from the venue was calm, the kind of quiet that settles in when there's nothing left to resolve. Claire hummed along softly to the radio windows, cracked just enough to let the night air in. I watched the twinkle lights disappear in the rearview mirror, shrinking into a constellation of memory rather than something tethered to me. For a long time, I'd believed closure required conversation. Final words exchanged, tears, shed understanding reached on both sides. What I learned instead was simpler and far more powerful. Closure happens the moment you stop negotiating your worth. Howard faded quickly after that. Not dramatically, not with one last message or attempt at contact. Just a gradual erosion, like ink left in the sun too long. Mutual acquaintances stopped mentioning him. Family updates ceased entirely. His name became a reference point in an old story rather than a presence in my life. And I was grateful for that. My days filled with things that felt solid, work that challenged me, friendships that didn't require constant reassurance. Even solitude took on a different quality, no longer something to endure, but something to enjoy. I learned how I liked my mornings when no one else's expectations hovered nearby. I learned how much space I actually needed to breathe. Sometimes small echoes surfaced unexpectedly, the smell of dill in a kitchen, a passing joke about playing it safe. They no longer hurt. They reminded me of a version of myself who had survived by shrinking, who had mistaken tolerance for love. I didn't hate her, I honored her. She had done what she needed to do until I could do better. One evening, months later, as I locked my apartment door and stepped into a life that felt unquestionably my own, I realized something quietly profound. I wasn't proud of leaving. I was grateful that I had. Because walking away hadn't made me colder. It had made me precise. It taught me the difference between peace and performance, between safety and stagnation, between being chosen and choosing myself. The story didn't end with revenge or triumph. It ended with